What is up, podcast peeps? You're listening to the 228 podcast. My name's Patrick. I'm your host. And today, we're going to talk about our stats on Anchor FM. Yay! Our stats. If you're listening to this episode right here, you are either the very lucky person that listened to the 600th play of this podcast, or you might be the 8th person that listened to the 600th play of this podcast. I don't know, but I know this. Since I've started, probably, it's a month ago, since this is going to be episode 33, this podcast has been listened to 33 times, or 600 times, sorry. I've had 600 plays for our podcast. Not this episode, but previous episodes. So I kind of wanted to dive into what the stats are for this podcast. Now, granted, I'll probably put this podcast off longer than I should have. I've always wanted to use Anchor to produce podcasts and create podcasts, and I wanted it to be raw. I didn't want to sound overly produced or overly, done up. I wanted it raw. I wanted it easy. And eventually, as I grow this podcast, there's going to be a different time that I record these. Mainly because I do want to do more. I do want to sound a little better. I don't want to sound like I'm driving home from work like everybody else does. This just happens to be my quiet time. I can unwind on the way home and just talk, just ramble. It kind of keeps me awake because it is usually 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning as I'm driving home from my main job. So that's been a good thing. Can't argue with that. So I wanted to talk about my stats from this episode in the past. So we're on 33 episodes. This is number 33. Right now, if you're listening to this, like I said, you're either the 600th time an episode has played on this podcast. I'm averaging about 18 plays per podcast. Now, that's pretty cool. People are wanting to listen to the origin and how things are progressing, especially with building the social media